First of all, every time we have a thought, we make a chemical. And if you have an unlimited thought, you will feel unlimited. And if you have a self-depreciating thought, you'll feel unworthy. And your brain instantaneously fires circuits that signal another part of the brain to release peptides or chemical messengers that signal hormonal centers. And when we get that arousal from the thought that we think, those thoughts sometimes weaken, the response weakens the physical body. So turns out that the emotions that are created from the thoughts are the signaling mechanisms of the body. Thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. And how we think and how we feel creates our state of being. So it turns out that the thoughts based in the stress hormones, based in survival, those are the thoughts that begin to push the genetic buttons that create disease. In other words, a person wakes up in the morning, and the brain is a record of the past. The first thing they do when they wake up in the morning is they start thinking about their problems. And those problems are memories that are etched in the brain that are connected to certain people, certain objects, certain things at certain times and places. So if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, the moment you think about your problems, you're thinking in the past, right? Mm-hmm. Now, every one of those problems has an emotion associated with them because we've experienced them. So the moment you remember your problems, now you feel unhappy. Now you feel anxious. Now you feel fear. So the moment we feel those emotions, it takes a thought and a feeling, a memory or an image and an emotion, a stimulus and a response, and we start conditioning the body emotionally into the past. Now, the body is so objective that it doesn't know the difference between the real-life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion that person's fabricating by thought alone. The body's believing it's in that environmental condition. So if the environment signals the gene, and that's the truth, and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, we're signaling the same genes, and genes make proteins. And if you keep signaling the same genes, you start down-regulating the gene to make cheaper proteins, and the body begins to break down. Now, that's an unconscious process. So what goes along with that is the moment the person feels that emotion of unhappiness or whatever it is, the brain checks in with the body and says, yeah, you're feeling pretty miserable, you're suffering, and we tend to generate more thoughts equal to the feeling that we have. And so then we get caught in this loop of thinking and feeling. So if we can't think greater than how we feel, or our feelings have become the means of thinking, then we're thinking in the past, right? And so we call that the familiar past. And then a person gets going in the day and they start thinking, oh, I got to see this person, I got to go to that meeting, I hate doing this, and now they get in their routine. And a habit is a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through repetition. A habit is when you've done something so many times that the body now knows how to do it better than the mind. So now the person running through the same routine every single day is on autopilot, and their body's now dragging them into a predictable future based on what they did in the past, and they've lost their free will to a set of programs, right? So now you have the familiar past and you have the predictable future. Those are knowns. So the only place then, reasonably, where the unknown exists is the sweet spot of the generous present moment. That is when the body and mind are free from those conditions. So along with those emotions that influence the same thoughts, people start becoming more judgmental. They start becoming more impatient. They start becoming more entitled. They start getting more afraid, more anxious, more depressed. And now the body is literally being depleted of energy because it's believing that it's living in an emergency situation. And in emergency, you tap all of the body's resources for some threat, whether it's real or imagined. And so then when you're releasing all of these chemicals, we are literally drawing the body's life force and turning it into chemistry. And so for the short term, that's cool. But the arousal that's created from those stress hormones is a rush of energy. And so then people use the problems and the conditions in their life to reaffirm their conditioning or their addiction to that emotion. And in a sense, they become addicted to the life they don't even like. And this is why change is so hard. So then when a person makes up their mind to change and they say, okay, I'm not going to say I can't, I'm not going to judge another person, I'm not going to blame, I'm not going to complain, I'm not going to make excuses, I'm not going to be a victim, I'm not going to talk trash about anybody, I'm just going to stop. Well, that works out really well for the first couple hours. Then the body's saying you're out of schedule. You normally at 8 in the morning, you're getting traffic and you're angry. Then at 11 o'clock, you check your emails and you're really judgmental and frustrated. The body's saying, oh, well, you've been doing this for the last 20 years. You're just going to stop today. So now the body, which has been conditioned emotionally to be the mind, wants to return back to its familiar territory, to the known. So the body starts influencing the mind. And it says, come on. This is a good time to judge. Come on, this is a good time to suffer. It's your ex's fault. It's the government's fault. It's it's the weather, the news, whatever it is. And if we accept, believe, and surrender to that thought without analyzing it, it slips by and it begins to program the autonomic nervous system to make those pharmacy of chemicals. And so that's when the person makes the same choice, does the same thing, creates the same experience just for that familiar feeling. Okay, I'll complain just so I can feel suffering. Then they'd rather be unhappy than step into the unknown, to step into possibility. And the hardest part about that process, first of all, is not making the same choices you did the day before. And here's the payoff. You got to stay conscious and not go unconscious. And it turns out that 95% of the time we're unconscious. So if you're going to stay conscious, then there's an element that also requires a certain amount of awareness or energy. And you got to step outside of that unconscious state. So the thoughts that they're thinking are slipping by their awareness unnoticed because they're hardwired in their brain, because they've been saying, I can't, it's too hard, my life will never change, it's someone else's fault. Those thoughts have consequences in the body. So then if a person then becomes conscious of those unconscious thoughts, becomes aware of how they speak and how they act, and they notice how they're feeling, they're no longer the program. They're the consciousness outside the program, and that's the first step to change. So when you're distracted by your environment and you got your cell phone and you're tweeting and you're Instagramming and Facebooking, whatever people do, you're distracted by that feeling. But I now know that if you take a person and you say, okay, close your eyes, sit in the silence of any external stimulation, remove the environment, sit your body down like an animal. Body is the animal. Tell it to stay. I'm going to feed you. You can check your cell phone. You can shower. You can have your coffee. But when I say, and so then here comes the challenge, right? So, and then if you say then you're not going to live in the familiar past or predictable future, you're not going to think about how long you've been meditating, what you got to do. You labor for that present moment. People think when they do this that they're doing something wrong because there's such discomfort that comes with it. But they're in the unknown. They're actually doing it right. People say, I think I'm meditating wrong. I always say, oh, no, you're doing it right. Because when you notice that your body wants to get up and check your cell phone or have a cup of coffee, and you become aware that it's on autopilot and wants to do that, and you say, come on over here, and you return it back to the present moment, you're executing a will now that's greater than the program. And if the person wants to just get angry while they're sitting there, there's an arousal, and they notice the body is amping up and revving up, and they settle it back down. Now they're telling the body it's no longer the mind, that they're the mind. Now, we've researched this, and it's tedious in the beginning at first because David is fighting Goliath. But if you keep practicing it, just like training an animal, sooner or later the body acquiesces. Sooner or later the body is trained to a new mind, and when that happens, there's a liberation of energy. The body goes from particle to wave, from matter to energy, and there goes that emotion, literally liberated from the body as energy. So the person who has the strong emotion to some circumstance in their life, and they're working on lowering the volume to that emotion, the more they lower the volume of that emotion, the more they're going to take their attention off that person and problem, and they're going to take their power back. There's going to be a break in their attention from that circumstance. And now they build their own field. And now there's energy to heal. Now there's energy to create a new life. Now there's energy for the mystical moment because they've overcome their old personality self. So I think, it's not like thinking positively. That's not the message.
Yeah.
It's overcoming until we become somebody else. And when that occurs, and the person starts thinking differently, and they start acting differently, and they start feeling differently, they're a new personality. And they start seeing those synchronicities and serendipities. Now, crossing that river of change, the creative process now gets exciting because what thoughts do you want to fire and wire in your brain? What kind of attention and intention